Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host and the most prominent political commentator in Lions Bay, BC. Merry Christmas and best of the season, Rafe.
Bah, humbug. No, the same to you, and I'm delighted to say that, and I'm delighted to see, Jim, that more Merry Christmases is going on. And, it isn't everybody's holiday, but it's a lot of people's holiday. And for those that don't celebrate it for any religious or other reason, they can have a hell of a good time just plain celebrating it as we always have. It's a beautiful, wonderful time of year, especially for kids, and I hope all listeners have just a marvelous Christmas, one to remember.
Rafe, you have your own wonderful little Christmas story we were talking about off air.
Well, we have a marvelous young man named Jacques Bilodeau who has a service of cleaning and servicing hot tubs. And Jacques fell in love a few years ago with this lady in Cambodia, and I'm not quite sure whether they're married or not. That varies with the time of the story. But in any event, he's been trying to get her to come to Canada. And they just would not let her. And it went on and on and on. And he spent God knows how much on lawyers. And I just met her and said, it's just a lovely lady. In any event, after all that fighting, he got a letter yesterday. They were going to let her in. And here she is. So it's quite a story for him. And the joy on their faces when they came here made Christmas come real.
And Rafe, I was saying what a difference a change in government could make.
Well, I guess it must be that. I frankly don't understand a lot of this stuff. I really don't. We get so scared over things. You'll notice that every time there's a terrible air incident, we suddenly tighten up all the security in the airports. And my God, it takes us 2 hours to get through, and then all of a sudden, 6 months later, we're back to normal. I mean, we live in a world we have to look after ourselves, but there's no way in the world that we can insure ourselves against all kinds of problems. And most of those people, 99% of the people that come into this country, make the country better than it was. And I just remind listeners of the Vietnamese who had the guts to get into leaky boats and get out of the middle of the China Sea in the hopes they might get to Hong Kong and from Hong Kong to Canada. Now imagine yourselves as mothers and fathers and little kids doing that. And you think of the Iranians and think of in my time, very much my time, the Hungarians in 1956. And Canada has profited very much by our generosity. And I don't think we should forget that. And we'll maybe talk a little bit more about it later. But I by no means say open the doors and let everybody in. But by God, if they hadn't had a policy very much like that, you and I probably wouldn't be here, Jim.
Well, exactly. We're all immigrants, yeah. and even the Aboriginals. They trekked over here, 10,000 years ago?
Exactly.
Right? So we all moved. That's what humans do.
Well, I tell the story, and I'll tell it very quickly now. Maybe I told the listeners, but in 1914, the same year the Komagata Maru was turned around out of the harbor of Vancouver, my father and his two sisters, his mother and father, and two grandparents arrived on a boat from New Zealand. And the thing that was in common in all this, every single person on those two boats was a British subject. The ones on the Komagata Maru got turned around, no food, no water, sent back home. The ones like my mother and father and their parents, they just walked off the boat, caught a taxi, went to the West End, and went to the home that was waiting for them, and went to the job that was waiting for them. What was the difference between those two groups? Well, I wonder what it was. One was Christian and white, and the other wasn't.
And now, the newsmaker of the year, we said it's a no-brainer. 87% of the votes picked his honorableness. I was going to say his excellency now. Justin Trudeau.
Oh, well, there's no question about that. These things are often rather hard to pick, but sometimes they stand out. And this one is such an obvious standout that you'd have to really do mental gymnastics to come to another conclusion. Now I remind people that these honeymoons with leaders and new parties and the sweeping clean and so on has a time limit on it. It runs out of time. and pretty soon they get back to being governments like governments are. But it certainly has been a breath of fresh air as far as I'm concerned. And when I read in, I guess it was the Globe and Mail this morning, the comments on the various people seeking the conservative leadership, I thought to myself, all Trudeau has to do is republish that every time they come close to a convention, and that should remind people sufficiently. I mean, at least we've got people that look human, are talking in human terms, and think in human terms. And this particular example, as you pointed out, is a very, very good one. We're not talking about somebody here with a huge record for robbery or something. We have a nice young woman, I would guess probably 28 or 29 years of age, who's had an absolutely sparkling record, absolutely nothing against her. Takes her all those years to come to Canada. I mean, I just don't understand it. But I'm now beginning to think we may have a little breath of fresh air for a while.
Well, I was pretty impressed, and I know, it's political, but Justin greeted the first group of Syrian refugees who were sponsored by the government.
That makes absolute abundant good sense, and there's nothing wrong with little politics if it's showing the feelings of the people that you're elected to represent. And again, I guess old man Mair's got a little example for you. Years ago, when I was Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, we passed some legislation called the Travel Agents Registration Fund, and it built up a fund so that when older people usually, got trapped overseas by these fly-by-night jobbers, they'd have their way paid back. Their hotel bill would be looked after, and they'd have their way paid back. And that money was raised not in government, by the industry itself. Well, it went years before they ever had to be attacked, because once it was put in place, there wasn't any fun left anymore. But one day it did happen. One of these fly-by-nighters left a whole bunch of people in Hawaii. And the minister of the day was quoted as saying, "Why are we doing this? Why should we worry about these people? Probably got lots of money anyway, blah, 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 blah." And he was an old colleague of mine, too. And he came on my show. I got him on the show because I'd sponsored the bill. I said, "Jim, what do you think that Grace McCarthy would be doing with this?" He just went silent. And I said, "I'll tell you what she'd be doing. She'd have brass bands and holas and God knows lays to pass out and Mai Tais, everything imaginable. She'd be saying, look at what kind of a government we've got here, for God's sake." And that, I think Trudeau has got that same kind of a touch. Yes, you can say it's phony and politicians are phony, etc. But I would rather have my leader expressing how I feel and let somebody else worry about the bona fides of it. I think that's the face I want to put to the rest of the world, and I think Trudeau has done very well on that.
Well, he used the Parliament Hill Media Center for the first time in 8 years.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing, and we just have to see how it goes along. And we've been down the road before, Jim, and we've seen these things come and go. And I can remember all kinds of great hopes for new governments coming in, and they last for a period of time, and it's business as usual. But I think that Trudeau is going to probably keep this one going a little bit longer. He, by reason of the way he won, he's in control. He doesn't have anybody who's saying, "Wait a minute, let's get rid of Trudeau, get somebody else in there." Even politicians are smart enough to know that's not a good idea. And I think he's got it. I think he's got the instinct for it. And I'm not sure you can ever actually manufacture that. I think that's just in his gut. That's the kind of guy he is. He's glad to be the leader at a time like this when we have this refugee influx. He's glad to be able to provide his leadership, and I think we're all the better off for it. And if he wants to pat himself on the back in so doing, well, let him do so. You don't get all that many pats on the back, at least not in the upper part of the back when you're in politics.
The upper. Well, another thing that really impresses me about our new prime minister is all the meetings that he's attended. He met with the premiers. The former prime minister refused to meet with the premiers. They've had a gathering of the finance minister. He has gone across the globe. He's met with business leaders in Asia, with APEC. He's gone to the climate conference in Paris. The man seems to be a person of action.
I want to say something, Jim, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will misunderstand me here, but please stay with me. We have an extraordinary country in that the regions really don't have a fair share of power, fair share of say in Ottawa. The way the population is spread out all over the place, the inability of the Senate to be anything other than a bad joke, makes Canada a very difficult place to hold together. And the way you do that, given what we now have, I would put in a new Senate and so on and so forth. That's for another day. But given what we have now, to keep the premiers in touch with one another and the Prime Minister is not only the best way to go, it's the only way you really can go. I don't know whether Justin inherited that from his father or not, but it is. It's a one way. And I know from having been there that you lose so much contact with Ottawa. Your MPs are as useless as tits on a bull. You don't even worry about them. And if you have a cabinet minister, or in those days it was a junior minister for sport or something, you never had any influence. And this was the only way you could do it. And it's the only way the province of British Columbia, for example, could feel that it was participating in the running of the country. Trudeau knows that, and he's holding these meetings. What is the matter with Harper? I have no idea, because it's not rocket science, Jim. It's quite obvious. If you want to keep 10 bands of individual brothers on the same page, you've got to bring them together from time to time and talk about common problems and so on. And the old man used to do it, and Justin's doing it, and that to me is the wisest thing he's done so far.
Well, Rafe, I'm thinking perhaps not a Senate. What about a House of Provinces where each province, little PEI and Giant Ontario, each get to send 10 representatives to sit in the House of Provinces and Territories?
Well, there are problems there, Jim. Please believe me. I've been through this from, all over the place when I get back during the days of the Constitution coming from England. I don't think there's any question about it. Number one, we need to have an upper house representing the regions. Now it gets a little bit sticky because it's easy to say, oh, look, let's all sit down, 10 from PEI and 10 from BC and 10 from Ontario. But that just simply doesn't work. The 10 from Ontario are never going to understand why they're down so low in the totem pole, and the people in Prince Edward Island will never understand why they're so high. Now, if you say, well, all right, then let's just do it by region. Well, regions aren't all the same. We had that idea in BC, that BC was a separate region with the West being the provinces of Ontario, Quebec, and in those days the Maritimes, and now, of course, Atlantic Canada. But they're not all the same. There are so many different cultures within our cultures. The only way I think we can do it, Jim, is to sit down and come up with some kind of self-made muddle. I know that sounds silly, but we're Canada. We're not the United States. We're not Australia. We're not Germany. We've got different problems, etc. And I think we need to put together an upper house which is not strictly rep by pop. There's no point in that. You just have another House of Commons. At the same time, it's no point having it loaded like it is now with its distortions. What we have to do is work on a formula that takes tact and understanding and negotiation and dedication. If we haven't got those things, well, I guess too bad for us. But I can't believe that Canadians, knowing what we have and seeing what we've had, and in the spirit of things the way they are now, couldn't sit down and come up with an upper house that fairly represented the regions, but still gave the big provinces their fair share.
Well, I saw one proposal given to the Prime Minister was that the 22 vacancies should all be filled by women because there are so few women in the Senate.
Well, that may be. As a something for today to fill a gap that's obvious today, that may be so, Jim. I'm talking about looking down the road at a permanent institution. There are a lot of institutions which should have a balance, not just a gender balance, but a race balance and so on. And I think Trudeau is trying to do that. Those sort of things should happen. But I'm looking at the overall structure of Canada. How do we govern this bloody place? I mean, it really is not easy. If you spend any time going back to Ottawa, as I did, and watching the Parliament work, you realize from British Columbia, you might just as well be from the Hawaiian Islands. I mean, it's just like a different country. And that's so, I think, for people from Newfoundland as well. And there's no lack of will to make it happen. There's just an abundance of political prejudices which come to the fore from the people, from you and me, say, oh yeah, that's a good idea, but you're screwing British Columbia. If we can get rid of that and put together some statespeople just for a year. Is that too much? get men and women of all different backgrounds across the country to sit down and say, God damn it, pardon my French, we're going to put this thing together and we're going to do it, and we don't care what the media, who are not worth anything anyway, or anybody else has to say. We're going to be the new fathers and mothers of Confederation. Just give us a year and we'll do it. Now, if we can't do that, Jim, at least we gave it a shot.
Well, I was wondering, why don't we have a Senate lottery with the benefits and pay that they get to the average Canadian? That would be like winning the lottery if you had to sit in Ottawa for a year or two.
You don't want to make light of this too much, Jim. It's pretty important to have a proper system of governance in your country, and even when you do, there are all kinds of things wrong with it, no matter where it is. But at the risk of being repetitive, Canada's uniqueness requires that it govern itself with unique institutions. The original Senate, that's what they were thinking about, but they really screwed it up. Have the people who are being watched appoint the watchers to begin with, just to start with. Having a situation where Prince Edward Island has only 2 fewer senators than BC, and New Brunswick, for example, has 4 more. I mean, those sort of things that showed that the idea simply wasn't put to a sensible, intelligent test. I think that's what we have to do now, and I hope that Mr. Trudeau doesn't get taken off that track. It's a very difficult country to govern. I mean, the big provinces like British Columbia are tough enough to govern. The country as a whole. Now, here's, I think, Joe, what a lot of people don't think about, don't realize. The country's cultures are many, and they vary from region to region. There is no West. I mean, when Ottawa was doing that for its own convenience, there is no such thing. And I'm not her agent, but it's a hell of a book. If people would read The West Beyond the West by Gene Barman, a UBC professor, it's an eye-opener as to how British Columbia came into being and what it was and what it is and why it is so different from other provinces. Now, that prevails not only in Atlantic Canada as a unit, but in the various divisions within Atlantic Canada, the French-speaking Newfoundlanders and so on. It happens in Ontario in a big way and in the prairies. Now, I don't know how much time you spend on the prairies, but one of the things I note whenever I'm there is either the last name, the surname, is very Eastern European, or it's very English. And in other words, people that you would think, just judging from that, either came as immigrants, Ukrainians, and so on, or they came across the country from Ontario and so on. That's not how British Columbia came into being. I mean, we're no better, no worse. We're just different. And it's those differences which can be harnessed as a strength, Jim, if we put together the kind of institution that will make it work for all of us, or it can become a permanent source of division. It's been a source of division. I think we've reached an absolutely perfect time in our history where we could do something about that.
Well, if and when they legalize pot, you can see a regional difference. British Columbia says it should be sold out of liquor stores since they're used to checking the ID of people and have very secure facilities. New poll says Ontarians do not want pot sold in their liquor stores.
Now, that's a division of powers. What is or isn't criminal law, and how do you divide that up? And those are difficult details. There's no question about that. But for far too long, Canada has let itself be bogged down by difficulties, by always demanding not just improvement, but perfection. And if we can't achieve perfection, well, the hell with it, we don't want it. Well, you can't build nations like that. We've got a lot of good examples to look at. And yes, that's a problem. Marijuana is a problem in some places in the United States. And to this day, things like capital punishment are a problem, and so on and so forth. But if you can get the basic principles together, you can slowly mold and change your Constitution to take care of new things as they come along and changes of opinion. But again, Jim, I warn as this ancient old man in Lions Bay, for God's sake, don't let perfection be the enemy of improvement. It always has, and it kills improvement, and it kills the whole idea. So all of us will have to accept some things in the Constitution and the laws we don't like very much. But that's part and parcel of living together in a country trying to be a democracy.
We'll have more with Rafe Mair right after the break.
See singing impressionist Andre Philippe Gagnon.
And I think to myself,
In Oliver, December 29th. In Kelowna, December 30th. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com. Unbelievable harmonies, spectacular performance, the ultimate tribute to the Everly Brothers and Simon and Garfunkel. Bird Dog and the Vintage Electric Band, Saturday, January 9th at the Alex Goulden Hall. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rafe Mair. The person who came poor second, as they said, in the poll picking the Canadian Newsmaker of the Year was NDP Premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley. Nobody gave the NDP a chance to win that election. No one gave Trudeau a chance to win that election.
Well, I think, you're right. And I think Ms. Notley is certainly, if there is a second choice, she would be it. I would like to very quickly say one thing about Tom Mulcair. I think he was a very brave, courageous man to stand up on the Nikov issue in Quebec and take his lumps. Probably, I don't think he lost the government. I think that's dreaming. But he lost an awful lot of seats, and it's not often that politicians show that kind of guts. I think he should get full marks for that. But you're right. Notley is a very good example. And what a handful she's got now. She's got all the bad things left over from 25 years, and she's got to get them all done in a year. I mean, this is really a strange country when you think about it. But no, she's another person that had a remarkable year.
And again, she seems to be pretty progressive, and people really want change now. They want people with new ideas, because I think there's a feeling that the old ideas at least aren't working right now.
Well, I spoke to Elizabeth Green. I always want to call her Elizabeth Green. It seems so appropriate. Elizabeth May, I suppose a few days ago. And we were talking about what happened in the federal election just in my constituency. Now, I have no idea what we're doing in other constituencies. She said over and over again, the question on the front porch was the environment. This told to me by Pam Goldsmith-Jones, who won for the Liberals. She said the same thing. Our smart guys were saying, oh, no, it's this, it's the economy, it's education, it's health, it's whatever it is. But when we went onto the front doorstep and talked to people, they wanted to talk about the environment in one way or another. Now, that's a big, big change from the last election, Jim, and it takes politicians a while to catch up to that. But I think that's been the enormous change. Ms. Notley has not been able to walk into Alberta and say, well, we're just going to bring in socialism here, because she knows that there are very serious obstacles to bringing in any one kind of theory the way our economy has gone. And it's Chinese, very interesting times.
Rafe, the best to you and your family.
Same to you and yours, Jim. I hope we have many more of these to go in the new year. I enjoy them very much. And to all your listeners, the very best.
And I want to say what they say in Britain. Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. All right, there we are. Happy Christmas it is.
Thanks a lot, Rafe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
My guest has been Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host. You're listening to The Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. Merry Christmas, everyone. I'm Jim Goddard. Have a great New Year as well.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.